Cool. That's really the only word that's ever come to mind for me when I think of Johnny Cash. Howdy. I'm Jeff Goldsmith, Senior Editor for Creative Screenwriting Magazine, and I've always been a fan of Johnny Cash's work, which is why I was completely blown away a few years ago when he went and re-recorded the Nine Inch Nails song, Hurt. Because I'm, of course, a Nine Inch Nails fan, and, well, that was way cool. Yet now, even cooler is the Johnny Cash biopic film, Walk the Line, co-written by Gil Dennis and James Mangold. We were bummed that Gil Dennis was out of town when we did our Q&A, but considered ourselves quite lucky to have had co-writer and director James Mangold with us for a great Q&A, which we're going to cut to right now, as James Mangold was introduced to our sold-out crowd for Walk the Line.
As is our tradition, we're presenting you with our copy of Creative Screenwriting Magazine with your article in it, and of course, your name on the cover there, Walk the Line.
Wow.
Harry Potter is just kind of staring down.
Actually, though, my name is not on the cover.
You know, I meant the name of your film to correct myself.
Way down there.
Yeah, but actually, we did a lot of research, and most people's eyes go to the bottom right-hand corner.
That's why I'm imagining Warner's called them up and said, what the fuck did you put us on the cover for? We could have been down in the corner where most people's eyes go.
It was a big argument, yeah, totally. You nailed it, baby. All right, we're going to start at the beginning. As always, we're going to do this moderated, then we're going to open it up to the crowd. I want to paint people a picture of kind of your beginnings in film and writing and everything. And I just want to kind of go back to your school days for a second. Tell us about going to Cal Arts and actually meeting and then later working with your writing partner, Gil Dennis.
Well, I was making movies since I was about 12 years old with my dad's Super 8 camera. And through high school, had been kind of a crazed filmmaker. And knew in upstate New York, knew I kind of wanted to, well, not knew, I kind of knew I wanted to study film directing. And ended up really on the desire to get the hell out of upstate New York, coming to Los Angeles and going to Cal Arts. I looked at USC and I looked at UCLA, and Cal Arts was this kind of strange catalog I got in the mail. But what was so appealing to me about that school is it was really small at that time. And anyway, I went there at 17, moved out here, and had this kind of amazing experience for several reasons. One of which was that amazing director Alexander McKendrick was teaching there at the time, who's since passed, but was an incredible influence on me and a great friend, and was one of the unique chances for someone studying film. Very often you meet a lot of professionals, people who work, have directed or written a couple movies or done something, but very rarely do you get a chance to kind of have a very close, intimate relationship with someone without qualification you could call a truly great filmmaker. And that what was afforded to me at Cal Arts was this incredible, I was his teaching assistant for 2 years as well, this is incredible relationship with a real genius. And at such a young age, it really impressed upon me how hard you had to work to make decent films, because what was clear was he was not a man who had accomplished what he had accomplished. If you know or haven't heard of the films that Sandy directed, they'd include the original Lady Killers, The Man in the White Suit,
Sweet Smell of
Success, and a host of others. But that was the product of incredibly hard work. And also teaching there and teaching screenwriting at that time was Gil Dennis, who, little did I know, would later be co-writing this script with me. But and was also a really wonderful influence on me, because I had never really considered myself when I arrived at that school a screenwriter per se. I had always been a kind of one-man band, lighting, shooting, writing. You know, how can I possibly know what I'm shooting if I haven't written it? So I'd write it. But
when you were studying screenwriting first as a student, what was the most difficult part of it for you to kind of wrap your head around? Or was it just kind of something that kind of came easy and it was a new experience for you to really immerse yourself in? Well,
I think in film school, the same thing is always true, which is that everyone's into, you get your computer program or you're getting your typewriter and you're typing in screenplay format and like there's fun to it all. There's fun to working in a crew. There's fun to making films and kind of breaking it down and breaking down existing movies. But the tricky thing, the frustrating thing is, why aren't mine moving? Meaning, why are the films or the scripts I'm writing not emotional? Why is it kind of dead? And that I think is the struggle. I think that the students and the relationships I have that go date back to my film school experiences, the people who seemed like they really crossed a kind of creative barrier to another place, were really restless to do something that resonated in some way. And it's very easy in the kind of social environment of film schools to get lost in the kind of geekdom of it all. You're just reading Variety, and these are the deals that are happening, and have you got Final Draft? No, I'm using Scripter. Blah, blah. You're shooting Panavision, I'm doing blah. And it's just geekdom so deep that on a certain level you forget the movies that really work sometimes are shot with, could be a really shitty lens. They could have been half out of focus, but they fucking moved you. And that if you are missing that component, and if the acting, by the way, being such a critical part of that, isn't decent, then you're dead.
That's why it was such a revolution with Lars von Trier and the Dogma 95. They were shooting on digital video, or High 8 actually at first. And those movies had amazing actors, all of which have gone on to huge things now.
And power.
Yeah,
and power.
Huge emotional power. Yeah. You then obviously next went to Columbia, and to my knowledge, you were lucky enough to have James Seamus, who was a writer for Ang Lee. He also runs Focus right now. What would you say was different about your Columbia versus your Cal Arts experience?
Well, there was a huge space of time in between. When I came out of Cal Arts, I was kind of the ultimate film school fantasy. I had made a short film that was very hot, that every major studio head or whatever had seen in town, and I got and I made the film it was the most cynical film a filmmaker could ever make. I made it totally calculating if I did these 6 things, I'd get hired by everybody. And I did. And
what were those 6 things, if you remember?
Well, I wanted to get hired to make an amazing story. So I designed this kind of Twilight Zone-esque story. I knew the locations I could shoot at, where I could own, like from my hometown in upstate, where I had already made movies under different contexts in the same location, and I knew how to structure sequences. I had in a sense, I was remaking myself. I had already made some very successful films that had worked, parts of which in this place, and I knew how I could get a huge amount of production value into a movie. Blah blah blah. Essentially, I made sure there was a sequence of parallel action and a sequence of this and you could see all these kind of different skills that's on display in the movie in a very. It's nothing I'd recommend to anyone to do. Because in a way, I don't think it's a very good film of mine.
What was the name of that film?
It was called Barn. It was about a barn that was alive that swallows a kid. And
I'd watch that. Is it available anywhere? Is it on the net?
No, it's not available anywhere, but maybe you can find it. It's in the Cal Arts Library. Actually, they have a print of it at the Museum of Modern Art. They're doing some kind of like lame films of filmmakers series or something. But the thing was, it wasn't that it was lame, it was skillful, but it was dead. And at least by my standards. And but it did attract a certain amount of attention. I ended up under contract at Disney, when Eisner and Katzenberg had just taken it over. And that is a long story that I won't tell now, but ended very badly. And, but I found myself out on my ass and kind of unemployed suddenly after having this whirly gig of a year at Disney, where essentially the lesson of that year was that, the world is a lot darker and more complicated than you think, and they didn't actually have you here because they think you're incredibly talented only. They want you to do what they say. And the problem with making it really young, I was 21 and I had a writer-director deal at Disney. The problem with it, and I say that with quotes, is that you actually are you haven't been worn down. You're so idealistic that you're a prick. Like that when you're faced with utter mediocrity, you call it for what it is. When someone makes a dumb...
As you should.
Well, yeah, but you have to when you're telling the chairman of a studio that he's got a dumb idea, you're not going to be there very long.
But if you didn't stick to your guns, you probably wouldn't be sitting here right now. You might have been doing Nike commercials.
Maybe.
All said and done.
Maybe. But anyway, so I found myself out on my ass banging around LA, and I was kind of suddenly the worst nightmare of a film school student. How did this guy make a hot short and in 1 year end up unemployed and completely fucked? And then I decided I had to go to the only place where I remembered, after a couple more years of doing this, being happy. making movies, and that was school. And that in a way, it was almost rescuing myself, because I felt like I was really depressed. I didn't know if I wanted to make movies anymore. I'd gained a huge amount of weight. I was pretty sad case. And I said, go to the place you were last happy. And that was Cal Arts, and well, I couldn't go there again. So I read about school, Columbia University, and I went there and had a really amazing experience there. James was there, an incredible Polish filmmaker named Stefan Scharf was there, and Milos Forman was there.
Wow.
And I was kind of the ultimate film student, because I wanted so badly to work on good things and not be sitting every day in my North Hollywood house reading Variety, getting angry, and which is what too many people waste their time doing.
A lot of people. But so, what would you say was different about that experience? Was it a little more analytical than Cal Arts? Did you find yourself more into film history there?
No, it was just it was a different place though. Columbia was a much more writing oriented school and a much more narrative film oriented. Cal Arts, like, I was an oddity wanting to make movies that made sense. In a way, the Cal Arts was a real art school where there was a lot of experimentation going on, so it was this wonderful thing that you'd be kind of the most conservative person at that place, as I was. But Columbia was a real fiction narrative filmmaking school.
Just before we move on, was there anything that you took away from kind of meeting James Schamus and just kind of being
he was
around
brilliant. He was brilliant about producing movies, and one of the things I always remember him saying was that make the mode of production part of your style. Meaning that it was always his philosophy was turn your lack of funds into a style. Don't let the worst student films and feature films that he saw, as he saw it, were where someone was taking low finances and few resources and trying to make, Titanic. That in a sense that use your limitations. If you can't afford to make North by Northwest, make Rope. Make a movie in one room. But I mean, the history since then is filled with movies that have been very successful doing that. But James had a really great way of putting it out.
I think he's an incredibly smart guy. And I swear to God, we're getting to your movie, which I think is excellently written. Well, one last question before we get there.
Good.
No, but one last question is a lot of people that listen to our podcast and they're here tonight are always interested in breaking in stories. So briefly, what was it that you were able to overcome to make Heavy a reality and do your first feature?
Well, I was... There was no entity that let me make my first feature, Heavy. It was just deciding that you're going to. Actually, this came from Ted Hope, James's partner, whose advice always was, if you want to make a movie, decide on the day you're starting, and stop waiting for someone to tell you it's okay to make it. That go next May 12th. I'm starting production on Heavy. And you want to join me? That's what's happening. And that one way or another, if you're shooting it in a black room where you're imagining the backgrounds, or if you're shooting it on HD or 35 or 70 millimeter or whatever the hell is happening, it's happening on May 12th. And that it gives you, because the other way is it actually is a kind of way of avoiding actually making the movie, and instead being the guy who talks, or woman who talks about not making the movie that those magical people out there won't let you make. And it's an excuse. And if you've imagined a movie you can't afford to make, then you imagine a new movie, because it's more important that you express yourself than you actually spend the rest of your life waiting for a chance to make another one of these shitty, overblown movies that we have too many of already. Why don't you make something deeply personal that you don't need to, create an entire galaxy for necessarily? And
with TV, anything's
possible. And by the way,
yeah.
That's what Peter Jackson did for the first several movies of his career as well. I mean,
totally.
that we have to remember, and that's what Steven Spielberg did. Very few great filmmakers started out going, my first movie is going to be King Kong. And anyway, whatever. That would be my. But essentially, we raised $300,000 to make this film from people we knew, the producer and I, and went off and ended up going over budget and owing $80,000 on credit cards and coming back and cutting it, and then not having. We got in Sundance and didn't have enough money to finish it, and found a tobacco lawyer who was rolling in cash who. Gave us $100,000 to finish it, but it was completely. We were at the edge of a cliff the whole time.
That's the way to go, man. Getting to this one, it's always hard to set up a biopic. I know that you had spent time for years. Start at the beginning. How did you and Gil start this project together?
Well, at the very beginning, I was doing a movie called Copland, and the producer of that film and my partner and now my wife as well, Kathy Conrad, said to me, "What do you want to do next? What are you thinking about next?" And I had this idea in my head about doing a movie about Johnny Cash, and I hadn't told anyone at that point because I had never imagined in that way that I even had learned enough that I ruled out movies for myself that if you need a legal department to make a movie, don't imagine that movie, and so, imagining a movie about a deaf upstate sheriff, that I thought I could make one way or another. Imagine a movie about an overweight diner chef. I could make that movie. But suddenly, somehow, because of what was happening with the casting of Copland and the kind of heat that was around that set, people were interested in making other things with me. And I brought this up and I said I had this idea about structuring it using Elia Kazan's East of Eden as a kind of template of how you'd structure the love relationships and the kind of his feelings about his brother and father and blah, blah, blah. And I went through all this with her. And what was really weird is then Kathy went about trying to find out what was going on, who had this material, and she found out that the material had been optioned and was owned by a man named James Keach, who was a director himself and was trying to get it made as a film, and had hired a screenwriter along with a producer, Edgar Sherrick, by the name of Gil Dennis, who was my writing teacher, as we know. So anyway, what then happened was an effort, because Gil had been hired to write one draft, and then they kind of had no more money, and they were taking that around, and an effort that Gil was part of to try and pull us together and kind of get this thing moved so that we could work together on it and I might direct it. And we corresponded a lot, and in 1999, James kind of felt that he had given it a shot to direct himself, and no one was kind of giving him an opportunity, and decided to have breakfast with me, and I told him how I saw the movie, and then Gil and I finally got together and started working on it together. And
of course, when you say the rights, the material, were you referring to the books, the autobiography, and the Man in Black?
I'm referring to the books, but what really
the life rights?
Yeah, what James had was also access to John. James had, through a very odd but truly Hollywood way, met John and June, which was that they were guest stars on his wife's TV series, Dr. Quinn, Medicine Woman. And because of that, they had become friends with a recurring role, John and June. And when, I'm not sure if it was James or John who initiated it, but John had given his life rights and the books to James. So James was in many ways not just someone who had been trying to develop it, but also was a really key relationship in introducing. I mean, I got to meet John and work with him directly on this.
I was going to ask you about, you and Gil both had the benefit of doing research with the people that your film was based on. What was it that you learned from them during that period that really helped you guys for your script?
Well, the truth is that this is an odd movie in the sense that most of the time people will go back to the books and they'll go like, oh, they skipped that and they fused that and that's bullshit and that didn't happen. And like the funny thing about this movie is that actually if you go to the books, they skipped that and they skipped this.
They meaning John and June, right?
Yeah, in their books. And that there's one, in fact, the first meeting, what I did is I got there and I go like, your story doesn't make sense. You guys don't, I've read these books backwards and forwards and there's all these chunks missing. So actually, the movie tells you more facts than either of their books because we actually got the stuff filled in between the parts that they never wanted to address in their nonfiction books.
Which I would assume would be, to my memory from our interview, the Vegas scene. Could you talk about
Well, it was the Vegas
that?
Scene, but it was just details about their own relationship and growing relationship, which they both were really sensitive about dealing with for a long time. A, because John had great deal of shame about it in relation to his first wife and his family and daughters, who all of them, his first wife has since passed, but all of his daughters. And in addition, June and we can only touch upon this in the movie. You can only imagine how much weight and shame she was carrying with her, being a twice divorced daughter of the first family of country music and also a kind of incredible church-going, moralizing family. She was kind of this wayward daughter. And so the idea that, in a way, she had a kind of natural nervousness about opening up further about her, after being twice divorced, how she managed to get involved with this guy. Because she had already been hurt so much by people making judgments about her in the past.
But how hard was it for you to get that Vegas tryst out of them that they had pretty much never publicly spoken about? Because I think it's great. It's a great scene in the movie, and it really adds to the story.
Well, it was literally going, the movie's not working. I mean, it was literally, it came out of a really interesting dialogue because John had read the first draft that Gil and I had done together and felt, and had this thing that he said to me, which is that he didn't feel like it was romantic enough. And I said, well, you got to give me something, you know. It was a real opening because it was like, I can't make a romance about two people who don't look at each other, don't touch at each other. I mean, like, you try. It's hard. And I mean, I got the you two looking at each other from afar part, but now what, and that's where he realized, I think John did, that they were up against, that their own goals as artists and what he recognized would have to be in the film in order for the film to work, meant that they were going to have to get a little more truthful than they had.
I can't even imagine what it would be like to take notes from Johnny Cash on your script. What was that like? What kind of notes does Johnny Cash give you?
That was it. It should be more romantic. It was or I didn't hate my dad all my life. We were at peace with each other. I mean, they're very direct, very overall notes. They were John. It wasn't like John to go, and on page 24, and on page 36. It wasn't that way. It was just a general feeling about the material, and it was mostly me asking him questions.
Something really interesting that Gil told me, and it was a part of your collaboration that I really liked, was that he had said that he had shown a draft at one point to Tom Rickman, the writer of Coal Miner's Daughter, and it was some stuff that Gil had been working on, and Tom made a comment to him, something like, it's not as edgy, and you took it and just blew the socks off with this great opening of the framing device of setting the concert in Folsom Prison. Could you talk about how you decided to use that as a bookend device? And I thought it was a great way to book in the movie. It really worked.
Thanks. Well, it was the first thing when I sat down to write in '99 that I wrote. I just sat, we all face this moment. I imagine a lot of you are screenwriters, and where you sit down and you go, what do I write first? And where do I start? And I have this belief that you start with whatever is in your head that you're excited to put down, and not necessarily, that may not be the first scene, that you don't know what it is, but just write. It's better than not. And what was in my head was this idea I had about John as a kind of dangerous man. And what I thought was missing was this kind of really, because having gotten to know him and having listened to the music, what was so unique about him was how warm and sensitive he was on one side, and how incredibly dangerous he was on another, and how fascinated he was with kind of criminal, with convicts and criminology and prison lore, and had almost cultivated for himself a kind of mythology of being an inmate when he had really never been one. And on top of that, I had this idea about how, see, I didn't grow up in the South, so I have this innate knowledge. I hear it all the time about how people go like, I don't like country music. And being a real music lover, I'm like, you don't know what you're talking about, because the truth is, what you don't like is shitty country music, and that's all you hear. If all I heard was Rick Springfield, I wouldn't like rock and roll. But the fact
let's not mess with Rick Springfield tonight, okay?
All right. But I'm gonna. But the fact is that it's, you know what I mean. How about Boston?
Take them apart, man.
Okay.
Throw in Chicago and we have a meal.
There we go. And Styx. All right, Stave Styx. Anyway, the point is that to me, I wanted to set something up where I had in my head that that, you know, someone who liked this kind of music would be bringing someone who doesn't to see this movie, or someone like, I don't want to see it. I don't fucking like Johnny Cash. And that whatever I did in scene one had to shut the person who didn't like it up. And just make them sit back and enjoy the film. And in some way, I felt like what we had to assert was the danger, the drama, and the beat, the kind of primitive, strong, edgy sense of what is most powerful about this music, which, by the way, isn't the twang and the zang and the I got drunk and I'm driving and ying and yeah. It's not what country music is. It isn't really what it is. It's really basic. It's just taking all this bullshit away. And in a way, the country music industry has created its own bullshit they like to put on top of their music. But that's not what John's music and that original country music was. And it was trying to find a way where we could say right out front, hello and welcome to what.
And you did it with the music.
Yeah.
I mean, because there's hardly anything spoken all the way into the prison, which I thought was it was great. Inversely, biopics usually have a cradle to grave structure. How did you know where to end it?
Well, it was something that occurred. I mean, it occurred to me working from this model of East of Eden, and it occurred to Gil and James and Edgar Sherrick in the sense that they had this feeling they were going to end with the proposal that happened, and I thought that was really smart. But for me, and I had never thought necessarily ending at the proposal, but I had thought one way or another it had to end at the year in 1968 when he both did the concert, proposed to June, and kicked drugs. I mean, there was so much that happened in that year. We knew it had to end then. And for me, the key to movies like this working is not doing. If I were making all this up, you'd never do a movie about the whole person's life. Like no screenwriter sits down and goes like, I'm going to make a movie about 70 years of a man's life. And that is
the problem with the biopic structure.
Well, because it's not in fact, it's not a genre. It's what I always say when people go, "Oh, you made a biopic." It's like it's a slot in the record store you'd stick movies in or something, or records in. It's like it doesn't mean anything other than it happened. I mean, it doesn't mean you could make a biopic that's an adventure about climbing Everest. You could make a biopic that's a love story. You could make a biopic, but it's like it doesn't really say anything other than the fact that it's probably about someone famous. And if you don't solve if you actually think, oh, I've got a story because it's a biopic, that's when you're really screwed. In some way, you have to figure out if it were a fiction, what would it be?
Going back to the music for a second, a lot of biopics that are about musicians sometimes just take a story break, a narrative break when they have the music. You chose not to. Each of these songs actually has a narrative thread that ties into the scene. Could you talk about just the research and laying all that out to make sure that each of these songs were simultaneously moving the story forward? Because I thought that was really impressive.
Well, I had done in programming what songs were in the movie, because I am a huge music fan, and I had done, a lot of this music wasn't available even on CDs, a lot of it, or domestic ones anyway. A lot of June's music was completely out of print, and I had to get from record dealers across the country who had like 78s and stuff. But that was programming it. But then the other was directorially and writing-wise, a strategy that Gil and I had. How would I say this? I have this theory that music in movies, is sometimes like sex scenes in movies, which is that sometimes the movie stops and it's like one of those late night Cinemax movies, and suddenly there's no more story and it's just watching people with like Venetian blind light writhe around.
But that's when the movie begins.
Right. Well, there you go. But that's we're talking about real movies.
Sorry.
Not your late night framing around.
True.
But the point is that in music it can be kind of the same thing. You have this moment of you could have suddenly you're so thrilled to do a recreation of them doing a famous song that suddenly the drama ends. And that in a sense, at least for me, the only thing I've ever learned about making movies is that if something isn't wrong, I'm not going to keep you guys interested. And so something better be wrong or broken or askew. Like I'd much rather, frankly, direct a dysfunctional sex scene or a murderous sex scene than just it's blissful sex scene, because it's just too much pressure to keep caressing a camera around naked bodies for 3 days, hoping everyone.
But back to the music.
Yeah, but
I'm sorry.
But in relation to that, it's true. It's a good point. But in relation to the music, it's the same thing. I don't want to make a sequence that's just about, wow, the music sounds really good and the pictures are pretty. It's like it should be the actors. It should be no different than the scene. I mean, if you want to make a movie, for me, the idea was if you want to make it alive, then the drama these people walked onto the stage with should be there while they're singing. It's like, just because I'm here doesn't mean that all the shit that I walked in here with has gone away. Like, whatever you're doing in life, you're carrying your life with you, and that somehow to make a behind the scenes movie would mean that we'd put great care into every song being also having a subtext. Like, I'm singing it Amy Babe, but my wife is in the audience and the woman I'm in love with is here. Now that's a scene. That's not just a song. And or I'm singing a duet with a woman I'm in love with, only she won't let me touch her. That's a scene. I can play that. That's like almost a silent movie. And now the movie's operating to me at 2 levels and not 1, where it's not just watching famous actors dressed up as famous singers do a recreation of a song, but there's actually something from inside the heart going on in the scene.
You also had a great thing going where at the Sun Records scene, you guys had a great way, you and Gil, of showing kind of almost the birth of a song, for lack of a better way to say it. Could you talk about writing that scene? Because it was really powerful. It was great the way he just knocked him on his feet and he rose back up. Obviously, you would have to, whip out your California dramatic license, but how much of it was truth? How much of it was fiction?
Well, Sam didn't give that speech. Gil and I wrote that, but Sam gave speeches that were very similar. I had played for Gil. There's a West German record company that put out these incredible records that were just like the tapes from Sun Records without not just starting and stopping of the songs, but all the talking in between. And sometimes you'd hear these incredible exhortations by Sam Phillips in particular, in one instance with Jerry Lee Lewis, there's this incredible monologue that he delivers. It really made me aware and made me think about how, while in Memphis in the middle 50s, Sam Phillips had this going on with John and Elvis and Jerry Lee and Roy. In New York in the middle 50s, Strasberg had this going on with Dean and Brando and Newman et al. And that as someone really interested in movies and directing as well as in music, it gave me an angle in talking to Gil about what I thought we should be doing with this scene, which is treating Phillips like he was a great director and that he was going to draw, because it couldn't be coincidence that 5 of the most important musicians of the 20th century all happened to wander in a storefront in Memphis. This guy must have been doing something right.
Totally.
Yeah, and so it can't be that it just was, Strasberg won lotto and every great actor of the 20th century walked in his studio. Something good must have been going on there. And so to me, somehow when we did this audition, it was incumbent on us not only to kind of show John getting born, but to try and show this relationship. Now, and also we knew from John and a lot of other material and interviews that there was a really interesting relationship there. For instance, Sam was really disinterested in religious music, and he had produced a huge number of black musicians, and was really connected to kind of primitive music and wanting these guys to kind of find something true. And the other thing we were trying to communicate in the movie at that moment was just what an incredible bullshit moment it was in music in America at that moment. In the middle 50s, 54 is the year Muzak was invented. It's the big hit song of the year was How Much Is That Doggy in the Window? And even in country music at that moment, it was all about this really smooth kind of, it from Patsy Cline. It was kind of a very smooth, almost cosmopolitan sound. So we wanted in some way to kind of give you a chance to see what these guys did and why it really was rock and roll and why it did change things, and that it really was this moment that suddenly people weren't trying to soften the edges and round the corners of everything.
Talk about your writing habit, how you and Gil work together. How many hours a day would you say you write? What's your workspace like?
I wrote this movie while directing 2 other movies, so there's no lesson to be learned for me.
How many years did it take to write this between you and Gil?
Well, from 99 to Gil started with that first draft even a year and a half before me, and then 99 to last year. But so it's 3 movies I was working on since then.
How close would you say that the final script was to the movie that we just saw?
Oh, very close.
So here's my big question. Why was it so hard? Why did you guys have so much trouble at Sony when you were initially trying to set it up? Because it just amazes me that a script like this would get in trouble. Was it just an after effect of Michael Mann's Ali not doing so well?
That would explain why Sony didn't want to make it, but it wouldn't explain why every other entity in town wouldn't want to make it. But I think that people were leery of I think there is a bias. I don't think about like country music very similarly. I think that people, I think there is a feeling like how many people are going to be interested in this movie? What's the foreign? Does anyone in Germany give a shit about Johnny Cash? You know, all that stuff that enters into it. And it was really surprising to me when we had Walk and Reese and T-Bone and all of us were working for nothing, that literally, I mean, we were passed on by everybody in town.
What was it that finally revived it, would you say?
Well, Fox wanted to make it. I mean, Fox expressed...
Had they passed on it, or were they the
No, they were our
door?
last choice, because frankly, everyone told us, don't go to Fox, they're a nightmare. So, sorry. But we did last, and actually, they were hardly a nightmare. They were the only people in town willing to make it.
Something that I just have a question about: when you write a script over a period of years, you have a good chance to polish it. You had these bits of dialogue that were really uniquely set up and paid off. Like, for instance, early on when they were doing the line about I count my feathers just in case of such an occasion, you know, between the two kids later on when Johnny's on drugs and falls down, he repeats that line. How calculated is stuff like that? Because I would assume it would be an after effect of a polish and being able to have a draft that you could.
It just
really
occurred to me.
on.
I'm using the line again. Just occurred to me writing the later sequence. The earlier one, Gil and I just rented all these Warner Brothers cartoons and we're trying to figure out, like, because John talked about loving those cartoons so much and trying to figure out what lines. For a long time they were going, "What's up, Doc? What's up, Doc?" But then when I got to that later scene, I thought like lying high on the ground in a scene going, "What's up, Dr. June?" wasn't going to be very profound. So.
What about some of those life-changing bits of dialogue when June says, "Mom, if I go down there," and her mom says, "Honey, you already are down there," when she was going to go rescue John?
That came from these wonderful, I mean, Gil and I would pass things back and forth, and there would just be these kind of incredible moments of where we started completing each other's thoughts, or one of us would write a kind of one piece of interesting dialogue and another would write kind of something bouncing off that. It was a very exciting period for both of us, I think.
Last question before we open it up to the crowd. We always going to kind of end with a tough one. The two slightly toughest things for you to probably navigate on this would be that Cash's daughters are still alive, and there's no way to please everybody. And also, it's a film that does, even for a biopic, have a slightly long runtime. How hard was it for you to navigate those two elements of who to please that's still living, and was there anything that was cut out, or was this your longest version? And I think it works at this runtime, but I'm just curious.
Well, of course, there's something cut out. I mean, there's stuff that we shot. I mean, there's just
something that you're still in love with, though.
No.
Okay.
No. I mean, some stuff I lost because I think it sucked, and some stuff I lost because I wanted to keep the movie moving. Meaning, there's a point cutting a film where the movie starts to speak to you on its own, and it's like you could love a beat or a scene, but I mean, I can give you an example, a really quick, easy example.
Please.
If you remember the sequence after we were just talking about John auditions and he comes home and he tells Vivian, you know, in the rain, blah, 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 and then he embraces her. And then right now in the film, as we cut it, you cut and you're out on the tour with Jerry Lee. This is probably the biggest lift from the movie. There were about 8 minutes of scenes of John kind of in the slow acceleration of his career toward that concert. But what was interesting is all those scenes were kind of the ultimate biopic cliche to me. They were all just hitting these kind of little historical moments, but they weren't riveting in some way because it was like it was time for the movie to take the next step. And frankly, the movie's next step was to introduce June Carter into this. And so we have these scenes, they'll be on the DVD, but it is amazing to watch the difference that lift made in the movie, because it was like, I mean, when you go from that scene to that cut to Jerry Lee playing piano, Waylon Payne playing piano as Jerry Lee, it's a great lift. And it's like, I never looked back when we made that lift. I never thought about how I loved the scenes we lost, because I also thought about what incredible energy it was to go flying from that moment of this guy in his first record getting cut to suddenly him being on stage.
It was a great cut. Was there anything about the runtime? How long was your original draft to get a runtime like that? Was it long, or did you just shoot more?
I wish I could remember the page count of the script. I'm not right now, but it was long. I mean, everything I do is pretty much too long a script. But I think it was more. I mean, I knew the studio was always freaked if we were over usually they're always freaked out if you're over 2 hours and 10 minutes. So that's pretty much, if you subtract the credits, exactly where we landed. But it's a concern. It's a concern because there's a point at which they start just asking you to make cuts because they just want the length shorter. So you try and ask yourself those tough questions before it even gets there.
But in this case, they didn't really make you cut something.
Well, we had a great preview. I mean, everything. The whole preview business in movies is a whole separate topic. But
Sure.
We had incredibly, astoundingly successful first preview, and
which protects you.
it does. And it's the way the business works now. There's two things that are powerful: actors and previews, and that essentially, when you have a really strong response from an audience and the numbers are really strong, then it in a way inoculates you against too much interference because no one wants to fuck with what's working. The opposite, though, is terrifying, and I've been on both ends of it.
The real family, their opinions. Have they seen the film? What have they told you? What have you kind of learned?
Well, we got
a
really great response from almost the whole family. In fact, we even got a great response initially from Kathy Cash. I was a little surprised when that story suddenly appeared shortly before we were opening. But I can't imagine if someone made a movie about my life and my parents, and suddenly I was watching like actors and child actors acting out the divorce of my parents and all. I mean, I can't imagine how odd it was and how odd it would be for the kids of the family. The thing that gave me courage and honestly didn't make this the first thing in my mind is I was making the movie for John and June, who over a period of 6 years I'd gotten to know pretty well. And so I felt like I wasn't any more than if I were making a film about my parents and then suddenly I was making a film not for them anymore, but for all of their children and nieces and nephews. There's no way you'd ever tell the same story, but I really felt very strongly we were making a movie that we had collaborated with these two great people on, and that they were going to be my kind of North Star in terms of what was right and wrong to put in.
Cool. Let's get some questions from the crowd. Right here, you, sir. Question was, could you describe your rehearsal process, both for the musical numbers, the non-musical numbers, and how much storyboarding did you do for your film?
Rehearsal process. For the musical numbers, it was a big deal. It was about 3 months in Brentwood at T-Bone Studio, hanging out with the actors, just kind of working on a system that T-Bone and I had devised based upon actually his experience producing first-time bands. The reason I'd met him in 2001, actually, was Winona Ryder introduced him to me, and I was a huge fan of his. And part of the reason I wanted him to work on this movie so badly wasn't his big film resume, which actually wasn't even as big back then, but was the fact that he had produced a lot of great first albums, including Counting Crows, Wallflowers, Los Lobos, a lot of amazing debut albums. And that I felt clearly if I wanted the actors to sing in the movie, which I did, I was going to have a very significant first album to produce. And so the process was something that T-Bone and I designed, which was basically, he said, do what we did on these albums, which was just have them into a studio, have them sing every day, have them have to listen to it every day and get upset and come back the next day until they, in a sense, make an album and have also, and it becomes kind of another kind of rehearsal, the physical experience of what it is to be a musician cutting an album. So that they're actually having a double experience. One is they're learning to sing, and two is they're actually understanding what it is to get together every day with musicians in a room and make music. And that it was an extremely exciting time and terrifying for the actors because they were absolutely convinced they were going to be awful. But it was the start and of I'd say as much of a real rehearsal as we had. I have much shorter rehearsals for the dramatic scenes because in this movie also, it's all about, I think the biggest thing for film is that everyone know each other and kind of feel good with each other working. The thing I live in most fear of is that I'll be rehearsing in a room with some actors and the scene will start cooking in a way it might never cook again, and I have no camera anywhere near me. To me, that's really terrifying. The other thing is that I hate false discoveries, and what I mean by that is that if you get even great actors in a vacuous space, like if we closed off this stage and it's just like us in a folding chair, and I did some scenes with them from this movie, they'd be different than if I do them in a room in Tennessee with nature out the windows and you can hear a brook and you feel the breeze. It's different. It's not different like because I'm an esoteric freak show. It's different because it's really different. Like someone crossing to the window to look out is like bullshit in that room, but something tremendous and real in a real place. And that what happens when you rehearse in false spaces, to me, is that actors start making false discoveries. They start deciding, I'm crossing to that imaginary window now. I'm blah, blah, blah. And that it's very dangerous in a way because all that behavior and those decisions are really, critical in a movie.
The second part of his question, how much storyboarding did you do?
A little bit.
But as a writer-director, did you find yourself rewriting a lot during production? Or
no,
I mean,
what I do during production is just, I have the luxury because I feel like I'm, in charge of the script and own the script as well as the movie, that I just, if it's not working, I lose it or change it. So,
Great.
That's all.
Cool. Another question. Right here, you, sir, in the green. Question was, at what point did you decide to have the actors sing themselves rather than use previous recordings?
He has live vocals too, so
vocals. Sorry.
Sometimes it's playback of them. Sometimes, there's no way I could have him sing "Ring of Fire" 35 times from 35 different angles. Their mics were always live, and we were always recording what happened on stage. But there were diminishing returns on that at a certain point, so you had to have some track that was your kind of bass and your guide. But it's always them. That's what you meant, I think. And that was from the beginning. To me, it's like you just look at the movies that worked, and it's like, I like musicals where I don't like Natalie Wood in West Side Story. I think that was a mistake. It's like, I like Coal Miner's Daughter a hell of a lot. So to me, it was just reaching for the stars in the sense that, I don't know how, in general, you play a musician and don't be the musician. That it seems to me almost a kind of belt or restraining belt you're putting on the actor if you're saying to them somehow you're going to be them, and then right up to the point where they do the most personal thing they do in their lives, you're going to stop being them, and now you're going to be Milli Vanilli, and then you'll stop doing that, and then you'll be them again.
Wait, there's something wrong with Milli Vanilli?
Yeah, he's with Rick Springfield in a special place. But the
stay with him.
But the other side of it is just that with John, people, maybe it worked great with Ray, but for the case of this particular movie, John was such an authentic performer, and he was never a kind of pitch perfect guy. He was always much more about being really there for his audience. That the idea again of doing something as artificial as that seemed really odd and alien to me.
Another question. How magical was the process of watching Joaquin really turn into Johnny Cash, who you had also met?
Well, but I never met, the one thing what I never met was the Johnny Cash that Walk was playing. And that was something that was always very clear to me. It's like imagine if you were doing the story of your grandfather's 20s. You'd always, but you're interviewing your grandfather. It's like, but it's a different person, and it is a different person. The John, some people, because I've noticed some people when they talk about this movie, they go, "Oh, there's a much bigger religious component to John's life." No, there wasn't. Not in the period we're talking about, because it's really hard to do 2 fistfuls of pulls a day and fuck a lot of different women and be deeply religious at the same time. It's like the truth is that what happened to John after 1968 was profoundly religious, and the problem is that a lot of people carry an afterimage of John, the man they know, the kind of grandfather and they know, and the man I got to know, and suddenly go, oh, he must have been that way all the way through. And when you truly try and imagine it, it's like, how exactly would we have done that? But the reality is that Walk is an incredible, I think one of the great actors alive and working today. The greatest thrill I have, greater than showing the movie to people, greater than mixes and all sorts of high-tech wonderful events you have where you go, wow, this is so fun. The truth is that that the kind of actors I've been blessed enough to work with, when you're sitting 3 feet or less away from them, watching them do this stuff in the moment, you feel like the luckiest man in the world. And I know that watching him, I felt like I was, when I bring up that thing about East of Eden, I felt like I was working with James Dean, and someone going to those kind of places and operating at that kind of level. And honestly, I think as a writer, you can never say enough for how much a great actor makes you look really good, and how conventional sometimes that dialogue might be on the page if it wasn't for them.
Another question. What complications were there?
Legal-wise?
Yeah, the question was
none.
I just got to repeat it for the podcast.
Yeah, sorry.
The question was, what complications, if any, were there legally for writing about the other characters that were still alive?
No, we'll do. You mean legal-wise? The complications were actually nil because legally they tell me that if these people were in John and June's lives and in the other lives of the people, then they were all historical figures, then in a sense, we, legal wise, we had no problems, meaning that it's historically known that Jerry Lee was on tour and Elvis and all those people were part of their world. And so there was never, like, I didn't have to get Elvis clearance as well as John clearance because Elvis was clearly historically a part of John's life.
Right on. A lady. It's got to be a lady somewhere. Okay, right there. You, ma'am, in the middle. The question was, she had heard that you had told Joaquin Phoenix that you didn't want an imitation of Johnny Cash. You wanted something deeper. How did you evoke that from him?
Well, part of it, and I don't want to be really, well, we are writers, careful about the words, but it would be, I never said those words to him. I said something much, and the difference is at least revealing about my own attitude about actors, which is that what I did say to him was that you're not Johnny Cash and I don't expect you to be. And if anyone wants to hear Johnny Cash or see Johnny Cash, there's tapes and there's videos. And that I would never, the reason I'm saying that is I would never go to an actor and go like, I don't want an imitation, I want something deeper. And because because I'm friends with Wak, he'd be like, "Oh man, I can't do that." It would be like it's so much pressure, and it's also a result-oriented note, which I really think if there's anything you can ever avoid giving, not only an actor but a writer, also is a result note. What I mean by that, if you don't know, is just going like saying, sadder, make me cry, bigger. It's not like you're talking about the scene. You're just like some schmuck in front of a TV with your beer. And so I tend not to give notes like that to an actor, but what I did want to do is I wanted all of the actors to be free of the burden of playing someone where they knew and I knew how much judgment would be upon them for every tick and every song and every moment that they did or didn't get, quote, right. And that in a way, you can't do anything well self-conscious. That's what it was about. And that to me, I wanted him to do his best work of his life. So all I was trying to do every day was go like, don't watch those tapes anymore. Throw them away. Find John through the air and through the wind and through the sound of the crickets. Find him through something else inside you instead of finding him by staring at things from the outside.
But you got to admit, throwing a beer at an actor and saying faster, more emotion, that's kind of fun. No? All right. You've been very generous with your time. Let's give it up again for co-writer and director James Mangold. Thanks a lot, man.
And that's how the Q&A went down for Walk the Line with co-writer-director James Mangold, who we thank again for his time. You could tune in each Friday to hear our new Q&As as they are posted. So connect to the internet and click Update in iTunes or do so with your other podcatching software on Fridays to see what's new. Future podcasts will include Syriana, The Family Stone, Transamerica, Mrs. Henderson Presents, and Hostel. But of course, not in that particular order. Although, who knows? That might work. If you miss an episode, you can always go back and grab the old episodes as they're still always left up there on the net. And hey, if you're digging the show, drop us a line. You can always email me, your host, Jeff Goldsmith, by emailing rsvp@creativescreenwriting.com. And to find out more about Creative Screenwriting Magazine, of course, ask for our magazine at any Barnes & Nobles or Borders, or find us online at www.creativescreenwriting.com. And until next week, thanks for listening.